And today is Tuesday, May 20th, 2014. I'm very pleased to have for my guest today, Mr. Michael Shrimpton. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm absolutely fine, apart from a little bit of hay fever. But
A little hay fever, well, that's
if I
going around.
sneeze,
And, I want to talk to you about your new book, which is Spy Hunter.
yes.
And I want you to tell the people, who you are, where you came from, and how did you come to write such a fascinating book?
Well, I'm an intelligence specialist, but I started out as a barrister. That is still my day job. In 1998, I was introduced to a very nice Chilean general called General Pinochet, and I represented him not in court. There was a very able legal team led by Colin Nichols who represented him in court. I represented the general in negotiations in Washington, designed to secure his release back to Chile. And those negotiations were led on the side of the CIA and the White House by Lieutenant General Vernon Walters, who became a friend, wonderful man. Dick Walters, as he was known to his friends, was unofficially acting for the White House and the CIA. Officially, of course, the CIA and the White House were not involved, even though Dick was driven to the meeting by a CIA officer in a Chevy that had been probably bought at a used car lot in McLean, Virginia that morning. And now, representing General Pinochet, word got around that I was the go-to lawyer in London if you were a spy or a retired military dictator. And I ended up representing a couple of very nice spies and acquired a small spy practice. And that led into, obviously, direct dealings with intelligence agencies. And then my opinion was asked on non-case-related intelligence matters, like the link between Iraq and 9/11. And some analysis on that was confirmed. And I was then invited to address intelligence conferences, like the intelligence conference in Washington in 2005. The US Navy flew me out to the Enterprise in 2006. I was invited onto the adjunct faculty of the American Military University, ended up teaching spies, or teaching intelligence officers.
Very well. So that's how you got started. Okay.
That's how I got started, yes. And then in 2007, I was asked unofficially to step in to take over the investigation of a kidnap of a British toddler named Madeleine McCann.
Yes. What can you tell us about that? Because there's been alleged sightings of the child, but nothing has been confirmed.
Now, the sightings are all bogus. There's a completely hoax Metropolitan Police investigation going on at the moment, which I regard as purely political. It's designed to maintain the fiction that the poor girl wasn't murdered. British intelligence are well aware that she was murdered. Everybody in the intelligence community knows she was murdered. The Portuguese know she was murdered. They're not, therefore, cooperating with the Metropolitan Police investigation, at least not fully cooperating. They know it's a joke, and they appreciate that London are simply staging a phony police investigation for PR purposes. I was very distressed by the McCann case. We were able to locate my team, obviously with the assistance of intelligence agency, were able to locate Madeleine. We knew where she was. She was in a boat off the coast of Morocco. I've set all this out in Spy Hunter. We briefed in the British Ministry of Defence, the British government, and we were blocked. And we were blocked for political reasons because Madeleine had been kidnapped by a paedophile ring. That paedophile ring was controlled by the covert German Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, which is the theme of Spy Hunter. And it's a history of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, the DVD. And the DVD were intent on supplying Madeleine to a senior official on the European Commission in Brussels. Now, we knew who this official was because Madeleine's photograph, along with two others, I believe, was intercepted at the joint NSA GCHQ facility at Minworth Hill in Yorkshire in England. And Madeleine's photo was being sent by one of the DVD-controlled paedophile rings in Brussels. There are two. One supplies the Belgian government, one supplies the NATO and the EU. That's broadly positioned, no doubt. There is some movement between the two rings. The photo of Madeleine was intercepted going to this morally worthless individual. And once the British government became aware, they were advised by GCHQ who it was. It was such a high-ranking name that the British government and the Foreign Office went into meltdown, and a decision was taken to sacrifice Madeleine McCann. Now, I was obviously bitterly opposed to the decision to sacrifice her. I could see what was going on, but my arguments were rejected. The little girl, the rescue effort was blocked. I was frantic, and my team, I wasn't just working alone. I was actually working under the auspices of a counterintelligence consultancy or counterterrorism consultancy called Gerard Group, who are based in Tingsboro, Massachusetts. I was on their advisory board, and our team knew that if we didn't mount a rescue effort while she was still on the boat and we lost her onto land, that we were unlikely ever to recover her. It was going to be much, much simpler to recover her safe and alive from a boat. The problem with rescuing hostages, as you probably know, is that there's always a risk to the life of the hostage. It's particularly acute if you're dealing with terrorists or with the DVD. The boat on which he was held had an industrial waste disposal machine which appeared to have been used for the purposes of disposing of the bodies of children that had been used before to transport kiddies. It was involved in large-scale trafficking of children and dangerous narcotics as well. And it was running kiddies and narcotics into Portugal. And it was absolutely clear to us that any strike, any hostage rescue operation had to be highly professional, highly secret.
Well, isn't it? Wait. Let me ask a question here, Michael. Because isn't it worth the risk? I mean, if you know it's a certainty, if they get off that boat with the child, that you're never going to find her, that you'd be lucky if you find the body, and that's all you're ever going to find. Isn't it worth the risk of a hostage extraction, no matter what the risk is? Because you're looking at the alternative is a for sure dead child.
Well, exactly. That was my argument. I pressed for hostage extraction. I was aware of the risks, but it seemed to me that they could be minimized by surprise. My plan was to mount an attack on the boat in the early hours of the morning. We had a fairly clear picture of how many people were on the boat, partly through infrared monitoring. The Moroccans are monitoring the boat. We'd set up fairly good monitoring of the boat, and we were confident that we could get an extraction team into the boat, take the bad guys down and rescue the little girl in very short order. We thought that the risks of leaving her where she was, which meant the risk of losing her off the boat onto land somewhere, far outweighed the risks of any hostage rescue operation. The hostage rescue operation was banned or blocked for political reasons, not for security reasons. And our analysis was proved correct. Once she was moved off the boat, and clearly the DVD were tipped off. They were tipped off in part by Leicestershire Police, because Leicestershire Police, against my very strong advice, kept alerting the Portuguese to the intelligence that we had. That was bitterly frustrating because people were risking their lives to get this intelligence to us.
Let me ask another question.
We were forced to work with the police.
Let me ask another question here real quick, because how these pedophile rings have been infiltrating a lot of what should be secured institutions and trying to subvert the personnel. In this case, a high-ranking NATO official, you said. How pervasive are they? I mean, is this a problem that exists on a scope broader than what most people realize? Is that why the police were leaking this information?
Oh yes, it's very broad. I mean, it also involves the police. The police force in question, Leicestershire, almost certainly was involved in the same paedophile ring that was involved in the Soham murders, two particularly grisly murders of two little girls in neighbouring Cambridgeshire, not very far from where the McCanns lived, a matter of no more than 50 miles. The ring these paedophile rings are very, very dangerous indeed. And they have penetrated police forces. They have penetrated the cabinet office in Britain. We've got a series of bogus prosecutions in Britain of people like Bob Harris, the Australian entertainer, I think is entirely innocent. And these have been brought as a distraction strategy to try and deflect attention away from the paedophile ring run by Jimmy Savile, now a notorious paedophile, who was exposed by David Icke, to his credit, in the 1990s. But nobody listened to David Icke. They kept obsessing about views on aliens or whatever. So they obsessed on certain views of David that I wouldn't agree with. But they disregarded what he was saying about Edward Heath and Jimmy Savile. The Savile paedophile ring is hugely embarrassing to the Cabinet Office because Jimmy Savile was protected by the British Cabinet Office. And he was protected partly because he was supplying boys to the then Cabinet Secretary, John Hunt, in the early 70s, and the then Prime Minister, Edward Heath. And he was going down to Jersey, the Channel Islands, picking boys up from a children's home and delivering them to Edward Heath's yacht. And they weren't getting off the yacht alive. And it's an absolute mess. And we encountered official obstruction on the McCann case at every level. And it wasn't just obstruction of the rescue plan. It was the passing of intelligence by Leicestershire Police to the Portuguese police after Leicestershire Police had been warned in terms that Portuguese police were penetrated both by the DVD and were working closely with Portuguese intelligence, and that the Portuguese investigation was not being run from Praia de Luz or Lagos. It was being run from Lisbon. It was highly politicized, heavily penetrated, and was being coordinated with the DVD. And Leicestershire Police kept passing intelligence to Portugal. And the effect of that was that they were facilitating Madeleine McCann's ongoing kidnap. So you can see why the police are now running around frantically trying to pretend that they're seriously interested in Madeleine McCann's welfare. Well, I'm sorry. I reject that. If they were seriously interested in Madeleine McCann's welfare, they'd have worked with us in 2007 and supported bids to mount a rescue. My utter frustration at the time was that everything was being left to Leicestershire Police, and as one senior security official, retired official, former member of the Joint Intelligence Committee, said to me, Michael, if we were really interested in rescuing Madeleine McCann, we wouldn't leave it to Leicestershire Police. Well, obviously not. They were not just dangerous in the sense that they were facilitating the kidnap by blowing intelligence to a penetrated police force in Portugal, but they were also incompetent.
Well,
we were forced to work with them. They had the UK, they were the lead agency on the investigation. And unfortunately, the parents, we could never wean the parents off reliance on police advice. And tragically, the parents relied, I have great sympathy with the parents. I don't criticize the parents in any way. They were put in an extremely difficult position. But the parents' reliance on police advice doomed their daughter to death because the police were working for the Cabinet Office. The police were blowing every piece of intelligence that was passed to them, to the Portuguese, which was getting straight back to the kidnappers. And the police refused to believe my team. Indeed, they actively rubbished us behind the scenes. I've only found out about this in the recent, the past 2 years. But they were actively smearing me, inventing conversations with retired generals, claiming I was a nuisance, conversations which simply never happened, actively undermining the work that Gerard Group were doing, and lying through their teeth to the poor parents, because it must have been apparent to senior officers in Leicestershire Police at the time that what we were saying was correct. Indeed, they were getting emails. One of their investigators, Sue Elliott, herself confirmed to me at the time that she'd had an email from the Foreign Office from the Cabinet Office complaining about my level of access to satellite imagery, and that the complaint from the Cabinet Office was prompted by a complaint from the Foreign Office, and some idiot in the Cabinet Office had left the Foreign Office emailed to them on the chain. So that
well, let me ask.